So it seems like Sylvain is hanging with 10s, but I don't know if he himself is a 10 when it comes to picking up as a Hall of Forms option. Let's find out.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is, we're going to talk about the upcoming 3 Houses Hall of Forms units. Alright, so, I guess for me, this isn't very appealing, but this isn't about me, it is about you guys, and maybe you will find something of value out of this. Looking back, I probably would have found a lot of value in a Sala Forma, or even Brave Micaiah, but it is what it is, and here we are with the seasonal, kind of outdated, 3-house Forma coming up. For those of you that remember, actually, in terms of like the worst Blue Lands flyers, I deliberately remember putting Ingrid there. So, oof, man, it's gonna be tough not to be completely real with you guys on where the status of most of these characters lie as competitive viable options. But honestly, if you are not competitively oriented, and I know there's many of you who are not, then you might just be inclined to pick up these characters as collectibles and maybe find some use out of them. I'm gonna do my best to provide that information with you, through this video with you, so you can pick it up and maybe use them in some areas of the game. But all in all, in reality, this batch of Hall of Forms units is pretty low quality when it comes from a competitive mindset. They will not help you win in Aether Raids or Arena. And they're not really the greatest PvE options either. So, I mean, here we are. So, the thing I like about Hall of Forms is you can collect these, like, favorite characters and give them some really cool builds without having to, like, summon for those specific skills. And if you can find value out of that here, you have a Forma Soul and a favorite character, then by all means, you don't need me to tell you to not summon, or not use your Forma Soul, or not summon, right? So go ahead if you're going to anyways. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be as objective as possible, as I normally am, in these videos, and help you maybe find some use out of these characters. And trust me, I'm coming from a place where I actually like Ingrid. I think she's my second favorite Blue Lions character. Mercedes would probably be my first. So yeah, I mean, it's not about my bias. It's literally just trying to give you guys the real info. So with all Hall of Forms video, let us begin. But before we do, as I always ask, don't forget that like button. That is very helpful. And I mean it. I've actually seen what you guys have done on some of the previous videos where I've asked, and I've noticed that you guys do actually do this, and it shows me, plus the analytics I have, where these values, or like where these videos most have value for you. So keep doing it, show me what you like, because that's literally what the button is supposed to do. Do you like the video? Yes? Okay, then I'll make more of them. It's really that simple. So just do it, and that way I know. Alright, back to this. So Ingrid is an interesting case. Out of these 4, I would actually argue that Ingrid is probably the only viable pickup potentially for competitive reasons. And the reason for this is, well, she has a preference weapon. So preference weapon is a huge advantage. Although this preference weapon is kind of doo-doo. It's not very good. But the thing is, if you actually look back at past Hall of Forms options, Summer Tana was also a Hall of Forms option on the Sacred Stones way back when. She ended up being a very good unit post-refine. In fact, I used her on defense quite a bit, with success due to that refine even with no merges. Had I been able to like Forma a super strong Summer Tana, I probably would still use her, but I've just experimented with it a little bit. So Ingrid's viability weighs heavily on what they do with this weapon, probably in a year or 2 from now. I'm not really keeping track, but she will eventually get a refine, and because of that, she may jump back into viability, and that's a pretty solid reason to possibly consider her as a Forma, even if it takes a year or 2. See, if she's your favorite, she does have something that may make her viable in the future, unlike some of the other choices we'll discuss here. But realistically, this is potentially good. Yeah, so Ingrid is 3442, mostly offensive. It's a Blue Lance flyer, which is not a great place to be, but the preference weapon should at least help her stand out in the future. So let's actually jump into some builds featuring Ingrid. But before I do, what I want to mention is before we jump into builds, because I know some people might be a little bit confused on this sort of thing, is make sure that you're actually trying to pick up like the rarest skills when actually doing Hall of Forms. So the builds I suggest are competitively oriented, and you can use whatever fodder, like Reposition obviously, or Wings of Mercy in your barracks to then give to the Forma after you redeem it. But when you're actually playing Hall of Forms, pick up the skills that are basically the rarest or contribute to your build, but then you can round it out with what you have already in your barracks to Forma. So if you see Reposition in a build or you see Wings of Mercy in one of these builds, I'm not telling you to pick up Wings of Mercy or Reposition in Hall of Forms. You should ideally pick up like a Rally Plus, Rally Up, or Ruptured Sky instead of Gale Force, or a Trace skill instead of Wings of Mercy, for example. So Sylvain is just an example of this. Like, just pick up the rarest stuff that's usually on seasonals or whatnot. In fact, Sea Feud may not even be in the pool yet. I'm not sure if it is. This is just a means of showing you guys pick up the rare stuff that is normally pretty hard to get, and there's plenty of options for this. Everyone's going to have a different experience. Try to round it out. So anyways, back to Ingrid. Let's jump into some builds and talk about it. So with Ingrid, where I would suggest starting off with is one of these three options. She, at the end of the day, she's a Blue Lance flyer, which means she has some heavy competition, even with those without preference weapons, so she's not going to stand out realistically, but you could potentially use her in one of these three roles, which would be with Curtains or Naginata. Naginata being that true damage thing we had recently that could work pretty well. Wings of Mercy Gale Force, where she comes in with Curtains and Quick Impulse, which is also really good. So those are definitely some pretty solid ways to use her. She will need some attack support, I feel, especially if you're using Heavy Blade. So ideally with like Ash or Regan or Altina or whatever, the attack buffing mythics will help a lot. Some sort of attack tactic would be ideal too, or a link skill, depending on how you go about it. Trace is a good alternative to something like Flow Guard as initiator, whereas Wings of Mercy is great for coming in when someone else initiates, such as Air or Uller. Odd Tempest is a solid C skill for being an initiator, especially combined with Trace, but it could be subbed out for Rain as well. There is a lot of flexibility in this sort of thing, and as someone who has used Ashnerd with similar type of builds, I'd say that even Ingrid should probably have a solid time doing this, but again, she's going to need some attack support because she doesn't have the most solid of attack stats. Another way you can use her, which does kind of work with her lance, is the fact that it gives a little bit of healing post-combat, and it does give 5 to all stats. The detriment, of course, being that she is only able to make use of that effect once per phase, which is why that weapon sucks. Straight up. But if you happen to actually use it, that's okay for maybe surviving a pretty solid nuke, and at that point it pretty much becomes a Silver Lance with the speed refine. But some healing is nice, and it does end up being pretty good when you combine it with a lot of the cool flyer skills that she can use, such as Near Trace, Rain, and combine that with Quick Repose to deal with impact effects. She won't really struggle too much with the right support behind her, especially for our safe type of support, such as Ascended Fjorm. She could likely work in this role. A speed or attack IV is still going to do a lot of work. A +1 should be available to most of you, as she is available in Path 2 codes in the middle of like the 3-house section, so should be okay. Anyways, back to the next character on our list here. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all I can say about Ingrid right now, where you can best use her. But as I said, because of Starpoint Lance, she could very well come back into viability, and because of that, probably consider maybe picking her up. Maybe. Next up, we're going to talk about Lorenz here. With the influx of so many Red Tome infantries, again, it's pretty hard to make a case for Lorenz, but he does stand out in a couple of ways, that being that his bulk is pretty good-ish. His offensive stats are just okay, and his bulk is okay-ish, like better, because the high HP with the defense and res is serviceable. But that's about as much as I can stretch for Lorenz. It's, again, it comes down to like, maybe you can just like build this guy for a specific way that you want to meme with him, I guess. And the 3 ways I could see that is definitely combining him with Near Save and just using Hall of Forms as a method to not only give yourself a merge and save some grails if you happen to build them already with grails, or just fully deck them out with one of the kits that you can do from holoforms. So the best way, of course, is combining really good skills such as null follow-up, joint distant guard, joint drive attack, maybe stacking his speed with null follow-up. Using Unity Blooms on a tank is always great, as Henriette users should know by now. It's one of the better tomes, provides healing, gives you bulk, and easier kills and whatnot. So Lorenz, at least he can be merged up through Grail projects, and you can kit him out using holoforms. That's pretty much the extent of where I would put him. At least you don't have to like summon for any of this fodder that you intend to use him for. And yeah, if you do use them in Arena, I guess you could technically use them there. But realistically, there's not really much more I can push with the Lorenz agenda here. You're gonna have to pick up characters like these because you like them, but they're obviously not the best in class by any means. Alright, back to our next candidates. This is obviously going to be a much shorter video than some of the analysis on holoforms or stuff that I can do. It still takes a lot of effort to do this, guys. It's a lot of image compilation and comparison with other characters. As you'll see in a moment, when it comes to comparisons, well, we have Tethys here. So Dorothea actually is at least somewhat serviceable because she has 37 base attack, whereas Tethys is 27. So that is a pretty solid discrepancy that puts Dorothea in a slightly different role where she could act as an actual nuke, whereas Tethys would struggle with that even with merges because 27 base attack is a huge difference compared to 37. So Doro, even with a single merge or unmerge, she'll still actually be hitting harder than Tethys even at max build. So that's what makes them stand out. But honestly, Tethys does work as a solid support using any of the other stuff like Pulse Ties or Tamari, which I'm not going to show through Dorothea here. So looking at some of the builds, you'll see that Dorothea really does want to bank on her high attack stat. That is what will make her stand out to something like Tethys. Two really good ways on defense that I could see you use Dorothea, again, even with no merges, is in a capacity that blocks out or gives Ascended Fjorm, a very common tank, a lot of trouble. Two ways to do this, of course, is on Pulse Tie, which is actually pretty rare and hard to pick up, and of course, Bottled Juice combined with an Impact and a Lull. Both of those will serve to either really deter Fjorm or potentially just really do a lot of damage. In the case of Odd Pulse Tie combined with a armor effective dagger, which is Sky Myogi there, she actually will hit pretty hard because you've disabled Ice Mirror using Odd Pulse Tie. Likely combined with other infantry on the team, you'd also benefit from Infantry Pulse. And by doing that, of course, once you factor in Mythic Merges, Doro should be pulse tying either Regan or Fjorm or just any other nukers in general, and there's definitely some value in that. Now, Tethys can do it too, but the difference is, of course, that Dorothea, not only would you get that really premium and exclusive odd pulse tie skill, she has that higher attack stat to end up just hitting Ascended Fjorm harder, which does help quite a bit for dancers. If a dancer can be a threat, it's actually quite good to a defense composition, and Dorothea can fit in there. The second way, of course, is using Bottle Juice for a guard effect, which again will annoy Fjorm because she can't recharge her Ice Mirror easily unless they're using Breath or Lancina, which is again good counterplay, but generally speaking should annoy most Ascended Fjorm users. And if you combine it with Lethality, you could end up potentially doubling her depending on the mythics and debuffs and whatnot, and even hitting her on the second hit with Lethality. That is definitely a very copium difficult situation to see, but Doro might be able to do it, and again, using holoforms, you can build out that sort of Doro. Okay, finally, on AR offense, due to her high attack stat, she can actually come in with Wings of Mercy and potentially really hit something hard or dance. And that's kind of nice for the dancer to actually have that option. So if you end up using like Gale Force strategies or just PvE options in general, having a dancer have the choice of whether to kill something or dance another unit is still very valuable. Combine that with Broadleaf Fan and potentially another unit on the team that's debuffing in some manner, and she will hit really hard. Bonus points, of course, if she charges at lethality quite a bit, but if not, at least it's there because that should kill quite a few things. So I know that sounds like I'm really pumping up and promoting like Doro seems pretty good, but at the end of the day, she's not a preference user, and she only is shining because of her attack stat being significantly higher than Tethys here. But a merged Tethys will still get a lot of work done, and in a very similar manner. So Doro fans, you can definitely do something, but keep in mind the Tethys option is always there. So yeah, with Doro done, let's move on to the next, which is going to be... I've actually read quite a few are excited about Sylvain, so again, this seems more like a favorite type of choice. I'm not a fan of Sylvain personally, but here we are. So Sylvain has a direct comparison to something like Cecilia, which is right under me. Now the difference, of course, is that Sylvain actually has a speed stat, but really does not have a res stat at all. It doesn't have a preference weapon, and his attack is exactly the same as Cecilia. The lack of being able to merge him, at least until he gets rerun with a 4-star focus, does also hurt those of you that haven't already invested into Sylvain, so you'd have to wait quite a bit before you can actually make him quite a lot better than something like Cecilia, and I have to put that in quotations because honestly he's not that much better than someone like Cecilia, especially when you factor in that her preference weapon on Cecilia is actually quite good. So Sylvain wants to make use of his speed because that's the thing that makes him distinctly different than someone like Cecilia. And that's what we'll focus on in these builds upcoming in a moment. As you'll see here, the best way in my opinion to use Sylvain, again taking advantage of Holoform skill availability, especially with the upgrade from the most recent patch, you should be able to get a lot of these skills, is picking up rare stuff such as Madness Flask, Immediate Blooms, and Pledgeant Torch. Now Madness Flask did come on an ephemera recently, but you could save that ephemera for someone else, or maybe use the Rally Plus instead. So you could pick up Madness Flask here, you could pick up Immediate Blooms, which again would give him quite a lot of bulk, and of course Pledgeant Torch, which is also really good, combined with debuffs on your team such as Tamari. On Tethys, for example, can act as a great way to make him quite tanky and take advantage of that speed stat. Now, again, the problem is because merges are not easily obtainable until summer, which is quite a bit away, you'd have to struggle with a +1 for a while until the 4-star focus returns. And that could be a bit inconvenience. Realistically though, the best build in my opinion is going to be the Wings of Mercy Enabler. Combining with like Fury, Trace, and Madness Flask, you get an insane amount of recoil. He's got a decent attack and speed stat that should actually make him stand out compared to Cecilia, and therefore enable quite a lot of stuff to jump in and secure a bunch of kills. It also helps quite a bit that his defense stat is as high as it is, because most of the stuff you'll encounter tends to be attack hitting rather than res hitting. And if you take advantage of that, then he could fulfill that role. But that's pretty much it, guys. I don't really think there's much more I'm going to talk about in this Holoforms. There just really isn't. I'm just trying to share as much info as I can to hopefully make you guys make a decision on this sort of thing. And it realistically isn't an amazing Holoforms competitively minded, but stuff like Ingrid could potentially be good, or very specific roles as I covered in this video. And I hope that did help you in one way or another. So yeah guys, that's it for me. As always, couple final says is if you wanted to, come check me out on Twitch as I play Aether Raids and Coliseum modes, just see everything in practice. It's the best way to also ask a question and get an instant answer, as I'm sure many of you might have. And as opposed to comments where there's a little bit of wait time, or I might miss your comment, for example. Another thing I honestly ask for is maybe smashing the like button. No, honestly. Anyways, guys, final thing. If you like the content, you want to keep see it coming, consider the Patreon description below. My best way to thank you guys, it will be a unit review of the people that support the content. That's my way of giving back, along with the end screen and a couple other goodies. Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one. Much love. Peace.
It's over.